The very first reading strategy we're going to talk about is making connections, and oftentimes it's also referred to as schema, Schema, and we will teach kids that actual term so that they can talk about their connections and their schema with what they're reading. Excuse me. The whole point of schema is to realize that when you read something, you try to personally connect with it. And I'm going to connect to something differently than what you are. And it's the same with my students. They're going to connect to things differently than I am. So one of the first ways I can introduce this idea is just by doing a simple activity where on the board or on a piece of chart paper, I'll write something up like Kings Island, something I know that everybody's going to be familiar with. And as soon as I say Kings Island, you start thinking about things related to Kings Island if you've been there before. So I might write things like roller coaster, the Beast, water park, maybe even things like La Rosa's, fireworks, it hot because it's always hot in the summertime, and maybe even like what's that, Winterfest, they have that in the wintertime, and so on. Summer job if you worked there, and so on and so on. I could write a whole bunch of things, and kids could do the same thing. Then on the other side of my chart, I try to pick something that they may or may not know exactly what that is. And kids are going to know this, but maybe you don't. In this class, I typically use the example of the island of Sodor. And I say, now tell me everything you know about that. And oftentimes, college kids don't know a lot about this. And so they might say things like, I'm thinking of an island. They might say, reminds me of Lord of the Rings. I don't know why, it's just the words do. And we don't come up with very many answers. But then you know what happens? I tell them, the island of Sodor is where Thomas the Train Engine lives with all of his train friends. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, and now we could fill up this side with all kinds of things that we know about Thomas the Train, right? So I do this with kids to show them that there are some things that you know a lot about and some things that you don't know a lot about. And that's okay, but we just want to realize that when we're reading. Because our brains actually want us to try really, really hard to connect to what we're reading about. You probably remember from your psychology course that our brain is like a bunch of filing cabinets with all these drawers and files in them. And so whenever somebody says something, whether it's giraffe or purple or Australia, it doesn't matter, but our brain starts searching right away for that drawer to pull out that file that has that connection and that experience that we've had in it. This is why I say sometimes vocabulary workbooks aren't the best thing to use, because it's whenever we encounter something or have experiences or really make a connection to a text that then our brains put more information in that particular file. An example of that is when my washer and dryer, actually it was my washing machine, broke in my house. And so for a while, until we were able to get it repaired, I would have to take our whole family's laundry to the laundromat. Now, it was interesting to me because when I first started going, my kids walked in and they were like, what is this? And they had like 1,000 questions about all these lines of washers and dryers and this and that. And it was in that moment that I realized they had no schema for what a laundromat was because they had never been to one before. Okay? And so immediately they were taking it all in and asking all these questions and learning and pushing buttons and trying the change machine and everything. And a couple weeks later, when it was time, after we'd been there a couple of times, we go into the laundromat. There aren't any questions anymore. They know how to use the push cart to move the wet clothes to the dryers. They know how to fold in the folding station. They know how to get their quarters out. It was a completely different experience now because they know what a laundromat is. And so if they were ever reading a book before about a laundromat, they don't know what I'm actually talking about. But now if they read a book that has a laundromat in it, they have a visual image of that right away. And so just apply that concept to anything. If you've never been out of the country and someone's talking about going out of the country, you don't really have a lot to pull from. In fact, you might even think about a story of a friend who told you about their experience going outside of the country. And this is for good things and bad things too, right? When I read something or hear something about someone who has cancer, I'm very personally affected by that because my dad had that experience and actually passed away from it. That's a very different thing than if someone says to me, something about multiple sclerosis because I don't have anyone in my life with a personal connection that has experienced that before. Okay? So just realize the kids are just like this too. And this is why we want to read text to them a lot so that we expose them to lots of different ideas in context to help them create new learning. So when it comes to schema, one of the activities that you do over and over and over again is because it's really important that kids, what we're trying to teach kids is that we want to make their thinking about their reading visible. And so the best way to do that is by using a post-it note system. I'm not going to read you this book, but I'm going to show you as an example. This book is called Arthur's Birthday. It wouldn't matter what book I picked up. This is exactly what you would do. So you would start modeling to them. I am going to read you the first page or two. I can't wait, said Arthur. Are you sure it's only Tuesday? See for yourself, said Mother. 4 more days until my birthday, said Arthur. I hope everyone can come to my party. What kind of cake should I bake? Asked Grandma Thora. Chocolate, said Arthur. Have a good day at school, said Mother, smiling. And don't forget to hand out your invitations, said DW. So what I would do is I would stop there. I would take a Post-it note, and I'm going to tell my students, I have a connection to this page in my personal life, and I'm going to write it down. I write it on my Post-it note, and I put it into the book. And so what I wrote on my Post-it note was, my husband makes the birthday cakes. So in my family, whenever someone has a birthday, my husband's actually the one that makes the cakes. In this story, Arthur's grandma makes the cake, okay? But this is my personal connection. And so you can see that with other students, I've read through this book, and every time they've had a personal connection, they've written it down on a Post-it note and placed it inside the story. So we might have things like, I had a birthday party the same day as someone, and all of my friends had to pick between our parties, and my friend acted like Muffy is in the story. Or on this page, this person said, every birthday my grandparents give me a card with money inside, which is what happened to Arthur. And this is making connections to the text and making our thinking visible. So when I flip through here, I can see right away what kids were thinking about while they were reading. And then I'll ask them to do this on their own. I'll say, now you take a book back, and by the time you read this whole book, I want you to make 3 personal connections or 5 personal connections, whatever you want, and have them write it down and put it on the page where they actually made the connection. This is all schema, making connections to what we're reading. It could be a nonfiction text, it could be another made-up story, it could be a poem. It doesn't matter. This is all about what we're talking about. Then you can transfer the same concept to just like a worksheet or a graphic organizer. You could read a story out loud, and here it says, when I heard the part about this in the story, it reminded me of this in my own life, and then they could draw an illustration about each. Or you could even give them text from a story and ask them to make a connection and visualize to it. In this case, this one is from Because of Winn-Dixie. Okay, so this is what I mean about making connections. It's very important that as teachers we're talking and modeling this thinking experience and process. And so we always start with making connections in schema because it's one that even the youngest kids can relate to. Okay, so I hope you understand more, and make sure that you read about it in your book or your textbook and do some searching about teaching how to make connections. There are all kinds of great books and ideas out there. Thanks.